The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. My name is Chris Shelton. I'm your host. Thank you for joining me today. I am joined once again by Shannon, Grover, and Bryce Blankenagel, my Mormon, ex-Mormon authorities, and we have had a great bunch of podcasts talking about this stuff, breaking it down, and they have been teaching me a lot about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as they apparently want to be called now. Apparently Mormon is a dirty, nasty word that is, I've literally read, has been compared now to the N-word, and I struggle to understand that. So, but today's show is not about that. So anyway, Shannon and Bryce, welcome back.
Hi.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we got some stuff to talk about today. Now, last week, I posted a podcast with Meg Applewhite about the troubled teen industry, and we're going to find some parallels and some connections today in talking about something we've been conspiring to talk about for a few weeks now, which is the attitudes and actions that the Mormon Church takes against the LGBTQ community, membership and non-members, and the attitudes about it, and what happens to really what we're really going to be talking about a lot, I believe, today is what happens to the kids who are raised in the LDS Church who are gay or homosexual or LGBT in some fashion, and the struggle of that, and how the church deals with that, both officially and unofficially, and how this ties in with TTI as well. So let's go ahead and get started, I guess, maybe with some history or some background on like where's the church at on this? What's the official stances, and where should we start?
Bryce.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. So when it comes to LGBTQIAP plus issues within the church, it has had a bit of a roller coaster that it has gone through. When we go back to the 1920s, we have the prophet at the time, Joseph F. Smith, who, I'm sorry, it was not Joseph F. Smith. I'm trying to remember which prophet it was, had a meeting with a couple of gay men who wanted guidance on how to handle their same-sex attraction. We didn't have
George
such a label at the time.
Wasn't it him?
I think maybe it was George Albert Smith. And so he met with him, and he was just like, the object is happiness. Just be happy and be kind and go on your way. And essentially, they implicitly gave his approval.
How progressive.
Well, and
Yeah.
don't forget, too, that Brigham Young had a drag queen for a son.
Yeah. Lady, I can't.
A drag queen?
Too. Yeah,
This is news to me.
It was a drag queen.
Yeah.
Wow.
On stage, Dad thought it was great, that kind of thing. So
Okay.
that's in the
Okay.
history. Yeah, there was,
All right.
newspaper pictures and articles about her. I keep trying to remember her name.
Yeah,
And so those have actually popped up
Brigham Morris Young. She went by Madame Petrini.
Yeah, that's it.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is to say that the church has kind of vacillated with it. And if you also consider this, right, there were sodomy laws that were the law in both the nation of Deseret and in the state of Utah once it gained statehood in 1896. But it was just like every other sodomy law, it was just how it was enforced that really kind of gave it its teeth. And when you have an entire society that is predicated on a system with a relatively equal population split, but requires as part of its doctrine that one man marries multiple women, that's going to leave a lot of men out. And men who don't have have partners may turn to homosexuality in order to get fulfillment, in order to to have physical expression as well as love. So there, it does kind of run this weird line where it's like, yeah, it's illegal. Sodomy is illegal in Utah, but if you're not making problems for anyone, and you're one of the lost boys that you're already cast off from society because you can't find a wife because there's not enough wives, then people are probably not going to bother you. So Utah has a very, very strange relationship with specifically with gay men when I'm talking about this. It's also notable that polygamy did create an interesting kind of culture for lesbian women as well, right? Because it was culturally part of it's within the scriptures, D&C 132, but a man needs to get approval from his existing wife before he takes another wife in Mormon polygamy. So there was, as polygamy was becoming more integral and more openly practiced in the culture of Utah. We're talking in the early 1850s all the way into the 1870s and 1880s when it became criminalized, and church leaders and polygamists had to go in hiding and whatnot. But for that, 20, 30-year period there was an interesting culture where, where women who are lesbian and closeted lesbian had a say in who could become their sister wife, and had, the ability to push their husband towards, hey, why don't you go check her out? Why don't you ask her to a dance, stuff like that. So it does create, and we do have a few of these situations where it seems that relationships between sister wives persisted beyond the husband's presence. And so that's kind of just an interesting facet of all of this as well, is that polygamy did create some little loopholes and carve outs in order for non-heterosexual attraction expression to actually take place in a socially acceptable way.
And this, despite the fact that the dogma and precepts on which the church bases its current intolerance, very, we'll get there. But all those things were still true back then.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They just interpreted it differently.
However they wanted to, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and don't forget that consistently throughout the centuries, men have always been more lenient about lesbian sex than about homosexual sex, because the thought of two women together is just incredibly titillating to most men. And so they have consistently, I don't know how Muslims react to it, because they are pretty harsh on women. I'm not totally sure on that one because I haven't really looked at it, but overall, that's how it's been. And so you kind of get that weird thing going on with that.
Well, it certainly seems to be it's I will certainly agree that is that is 20th century attitudes about it. No doubt. No doubt. Right. I think it's debatable culture by culture, but but certainly.
Yeah. Regency era, especially like 1800s, 1800s, it would be referred to as the women being friends, a certain type of friendship.
Right.
And everyone looked the other way. You had, especially like in England, you had the buggery laws, as they called them, that started up, I think, during Edward I, after King Henry VIII. I mean, his son, and I think he's the one that started the really extreme ones, and they went after men, but they really didn't go after women. It just nobody cared on it with women. But I think they also, generally, I don't know. We're getting too far onto the weeds.
No worries.
They also didn't think women really felt anything during it. At least the wives weren't supposed to. So that's the courtesans.
Fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough. So Bryce, please, what were you saying? Continue.
Yeah, no. All of this is completely relevant. I mean, we've had Boston relationships, where it was two women who were roommates, forever roommates. And it was a culture that became prevalent in Boston and kind of expanded from there. during the suffrage movement. So that's, like there are pockets, individual pockets where these expressions have existed, but by and large, like that's all within a backdrop of a sexually oppressive society. So we need to recognize that the standard was that anyone who was not cis hetero was seen as other, as wrong, as something to that effect, right? It's just a matter of was that activity policed aggressively? Were laws actually enforced, or did people just turn a blind eye? And where we see kind of a turning point take place in Mormon history is around the 50s, with McCarthyism and it was the Lavender Scare. And with everything that was going on at that time, it became very in vogue for the extremist conservative movement to bash on gays, bash on anyone that isn't cis hetero at the time. And that it became a rallying cry. It became a wedge issue in the party. In the 1940s into the 50s, and that's when the LDS Church kind of picked up the crucible and decided to go about their own cleansing efforts. One notable figure in all of this is Patriarch Smith. Now, this is an individual. So there's an office in the church that Joseph Smith equated as being equal in power and authority with the prophet. And we talked about this during the succession, but the office of patriarch of the church, Joseph's father, Joseph Smith Sr., had the position. He was patriarch of Joseph Smith, therefore patriarch of the church. And then it was passed down to Hiram after Joseph Sr. died. And then after Hiram and Joseph died in the Carthage shootout, the office of patriarch was constantly in flux. And we remember part of that happened. What happened there was William Smith, Joseph's only surviving younger brother, who was a bit of a pariah and kind of not very well liked in the community. He basically told Brigham Young, "Hey, if you make me patriarch of the church, I'll follow your movement, and I'll champion you as the next successor." The rightful successor. And Brigham said, "Okay, cool. Just as long as you don't claim any power, as long as you don't try and exercise any power of what the patriarch is." William Smith did exactly that. And then William Smith was excommunicated from Brigham Young's church. So the office of patriarch since that time has had kind of an odd relationship, because it was a power threat to Brigham Young, and any office or any church organization that was a threat to Brigham Young's power was dismissed or was denigrated or was put on the back burner. For example, the Relief Society, right? Joseph set up the Relief Society to be essentially the women's organization, the equal in power structure. The men administrate the men's affairs, the women administrate the women's affairs. That's how it shall be. But Brigham Young outlawed the Relief Society and waited until the 1860s to allow it to be reorganized in Utah. So there's a 20-year gap where Brigham didn't even allow the Relief Society to meet. So similar to that, the office of patriarch was an office that Brigham had to wrestle under his boot and try and keep there. And was successful in doing so now. And the office of patriarch in the church now, it is no longer, essentially the functions of a patriarch is that you provide patriarchal blessings. These are Mormon horoscopes. There's an initiation rite, essentially, when most kids are teens, that they get their patriarchal blessing, and that declares their lineage. It tells them what Hebrew tribe they're from, even if they have absolutely no Hebrew lineage, like this person right here and like Shannon over there. We come from tribes of Hebrew just because the patriarch said so.
Yes.
So that's what patriarchs do, and because the church is huge, there are thousands of patriarchs now, but there used to be the office of patriarch to the church. So that was, the Joseph F. Smith and the Joseph Fielding Smith, who were the prophets of the LDS Church in Utah. They were Hiram Smith's descendants, because Joseph Smith's descendants stayed with the RLDS Church, and Emma and Joseph III. They stayed out with a different religious movement. But so then there was this person, not the president Joseph Fielding Smith, but the patriarch Joseph Fielding Smith, and it became known that it was known already in upper circles that he was a gay man. But it became publicly known that he was a gay man because he was consorting with someone who was from a Mormon royalty family. And this family, because this took place in the mid 1940s, when homophobia became much more culturally in vogue. Joseph Fielding Smith was summarily excused, or let's say asked to tender his resignation from the office of patriarch, and the office itself was removed. The office no longer existed after he was removed.
That's what happened. I was wondering what the as opposed to the origin story, the death story of the patriarch office, because I was like, I don't think this thing is around anymore. Okay, so that's interesting. So it was homosexuality that destroyed the patriarchy.
That was beautiful.
Don't admit it. Don't admit it out loud.
Okay. So okay, fair enough. Well, why don't we, since we're talking original stuff and patriarchy, do we want to get into law of chastity now, or where does this go? Because we're talking, because in terms of like foundational beliefs of why is this such a problem for Mormons, right? Because there's some religions that even with the cultural backlash or pushback against homosexuality, they went, nah, we're okay with that. It's not a problem, right? There's some religions that did that, and then there's other religions that very, very much did not. So why the Mormons? Why were the Mormons so hostile to this, or so easy to get on board with the hate about it?
I've never found a bigotry that Mormons don't like. Whatever is culturally in vogue with the conservative movement, that's what the church. I mean, that's the culture that is plugged into the church. That that boils up, that percolates through the church. And so, like after the end of the office of patriarch, with Patriarch Joseph Fielding Smith, resigning. We're starting to get into the much more modern church. And once we get to there, I mean, there's one figure who's responsible for the culture of sex and sex oppression in the church, more so than any other prophet, and that's Spencer W. Kimball. And he's ends up being prophet about 15, 20 years after the Joseph Fielding Smith fiasco died down and was gone from people's cultural memory.
60s?
Yes. When was Kimball called prophet? Was it 60s or was he 70s? Early 70s.
70s.
Early 70s.
David O. McKay was prophet until like 72, I think. I was really young. And then who was before him? Wasn't there a really short one before Kimball?
There's Harold B. Lee.
Harold B. Lee. He was like a year or two. Not the shortest. Hunter, I think, was the shortest. But then, it was 70s when Kimball was put in, and he was there until something like 83, 84.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did he do to shape this whole thing? Because this, what did he do?
I pass the baton to you, Shannon.
Oh my God, this guy had issues, and he spread them out to everybody. I mean, one of the biggest things is, and even his descendants are like, please stop publishing this and giving it out, is the book, The Miracle of Forgiveness. And all this is about is shaming teenagers in particular for having any kind of sexual feeling. He came up with this idea.
Was this his response to free love and the counterculture revolution?
It absolutely was.
Okay.
And it was just complete shaming for anything natural that you feel that way, to the extent of telling boys, and especially missionaries, who were 19 years old going out, and of course it's their height of their sexual whatever, and it's like telling them to sleep holding the Book of Mormon in both hands so they don't have dreams about having sex, because you can control your dreams, of course. Or even tie your left hand to the bedpost so you can't wake up finding yourself masturbating. God, yes. I mean, he shamed him so bad that this book has caused more suicides of teenagers and young adults than anything else produced by Mormonism.
Wow, that's
It
quite a
is.
statement. Really?
It is a horrific book, and they didn't stop
Wow.
actually printing it till what, 2017?
Yeah.
I was
My
required
goodness.
to read it 4 times.
It's the book that when people are meeting with their bishop and the bishop learns that they have broken the law of chastity, or that they're suffering from depression, or that they may have sinned in one way or another, the bishop will so often say, and this is something that's only recently fallen out of the culture, the bishop would hand them a copy of Miracle of Forgiveness, say, you need to read this.
Yeah.
It was the Band-Aid solution that every bishop had a cabinet full of these fucking books in their office, and they turn around, hand it to kids.
Yeah.
And that the book has a body count.
It does. You remember that last time we were talking, when I told of that first time the bishop telling me I had committed a sexual sin, and that's why I had depression and wanted to kill myself? Well, that was the first time I was told to read that. And then I was told to twice on my mission. And so there was one of the times I was reading it. This is how extreme it got. Okay. Is one of the times I was reading it, I was thinking about a guy I had dated before my mission who I had kissed a lot. We'd made out a lot. Did anything else happen? No. Did anything happen below the neck? No. But I was in terror of the whole thing, thinking if I told my mission president, I would be sent home early. And that would be an incredibly shameful moment. And I mean, Bryce has heard, I read on the podcast when we were discussing this book, we did a deep dive into it a few years ago. And I read parts of my journal because I had mentioned to him that I had had to read it twice on my mission. And so I went looking through all my mission journals, which there's like 7 of them. I don't know. It's the only time in my life I kept a daily journal. and
how valuable now.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I couldn't finish the last one because there was so much of the various types of sexual abuse that were happening, not full on rape, but other stuff from just my mission president alone that I had forgotten about. And, a lot of verbal, a lot of implication, all these things. And grooming is really what it was. And I'm just terrified of reading the last half of it, honestly, because I'm afraid I don't want to remember all of that anymore. But anyway, so this is something this book caused, because it's like, I kissed a guy. Wow. Okay. And I liked kissing him. Okay. Isn't that a normal thing? Did I have sex with him? No. Did he touch the private parts of my body? No. Did I touch his? No. Did I even know what the hell was going on with his? No. Or even my own? No. Because, that's another thing. Utah's especially really big on, if you just teach abstinence and don't let them know what sex is, they'll never do it. We all know is absolutely untrue.
Well, this is a level of denial on the part of the people who do this that I still struggle. As much as I know about cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias, I still struggle with this one, because we were all teenagers.
Yep.
And the idea that you just throw all that into a memory hole and forget what it's like, and tell kids, oh yeah, no, self-discipline's the way to go.
Yeah, it's like, these are natural feelings, but yet you're also taught really strongly from the Book of Mormon, the natural man is an enemy to God. So if you feel natural feelings, you are sinning, and it's huge also in the Mormon church that if you think the sin, you have committed the sin. And really, I mean, way I was raised, I don't know if they still do it now, but the way I was raised is that, the 10 commandments are the physical commandments. The covenants you make in the temple, and the commandments that are made there, those are the mental ones, the spiritual ones that are just taking those 10 commandments to the next level. And so, it's the thought policing and all that stuff, because that's really what it's about. So you're told, if you think about committing adultery in your heart, you have committed adultery.
Oh my God.
Need to go and repent of it. Right.
Oh, that's just so nasty. That is
It is.
so nasty.
And so when you're raised to think that you actually have control over your dreams, then it raises a level of anxiety in you growing up. You're afraid to sleep at night. You're afraid to have dreams. You have to have dreams. That's the release of your subconscious, for fuck's sake. And I'm like, so does that mean if I'm being killed in my dream, then that's my fault? Because there was an individual when I was growing up that I
Of course it is.
kept having dreams they were trying to kill me. And
Right.
and those, there was so much of that you're afraid to ask leadership about, because you're afraid of the punishment you're going to get.
And let me ask about something here. Let me really dive into this for a second, because since we're talking about this, and because this actually is core to what we're talking about
Yes.
with the shaming and guilt and double binds connected with growing up LGBT in this environment. These thought controls are not, from my perspective, are not small fish things. Some people might listen to this and go, well, okay, so what, right? Thoughts. But when you engage in a culture of thought policing and the guilt and shame that goes along with that, is there no outlet for or help beyond shut up, you're bad? No. For kids who come to a bishop or come to their ward president or stake president or whatever and go, I can't stop the thoughts and it's driving me crazy, I don't want to have them. What happens to those kids?
What they're
they're evolving minds. They're not mature minds that are in control of their thoughts, if we ever are. So what are they met with? They're
met with, okay, you need to work on your spirituality. You need to fast and pray more. Let's have you not take the sacrament for the next few Sundays. You got to meet with me once a week, and you got to read this much of your Book of Mormon every day. You need to have this scripture memorized so you can say it out loud every time these thoughts come. Oh God. Or this music you got to do. I mean, Boyd K. Packer did a talk in General Conference that got turned into a film strip at the time. This really ages me, folks, because I got this every year, but it was called Worthy Music, Worthy Thoughts, because, you get these bad thoughts in your head, and the way to get rid of them is to put the good music in and don't listen to bad music, because that'll give you bad thoughts, like, say, Rod Stewart and all of his songs about sex. You can't listen to those, because then you're going to want to have sex, and you can't do that. So you got to put in there a hymn to think of, missionaries. We were told to quote D&C chapter 4, section 4, which is like the missionary scripture. We all had to memorize it. Every one of us did, and we had to quote it all the fucking time. Or have a hymn or a primary song in your head that you just automatically start singing in your head to control those thoughts, to get rid of the bad ones. And you're not taught to deal with them. You're not taught to understand them. You're taught to cover them up, to pretend like they don't exist, and they'll just turn away. It's like putting your doubts on a shelf and closing the door. They don't ever disappear. All they do is get worse, and so there's so many people who've left the church who were being disciplined before for things like pornography and pornography addiction or whatever. And they've talked about, once they were out of the church, stopped thinking of it as this terrible, evil, awful thing. They stopped wanting it so much.
Thank you for going there, because that's exactly where I wanted to go, right? Is you actually create a kind of, if I know this is a strong word, but I don't think it's too strong a word in some cases, at least, is you can create a kind of psychosis in a person by forbidding and creating double binds. And just to be clear about double binds, those are your catch-22s. Those are your contradictory rules. This is true, but they can't both be true at the same time. Right. They are mutually exclusive ideas. you are great under God and God loves you. God hates you for all your thoughts. I mean, these are two things that are going to create a kind of bouncing effect between them in a person's mind, or a spinny effect, you could say. And we've all felt this. I mean, this is a human experience. But when you really pour on the coals of authority, and that these rules are absolute, they are not to be, they cannot change. They are not to be questioned. There is no other way than this. And every cult does this. Mm-hmm. This is the crazy making. This is the anatomy of the crazy making. And Shannon just literally described exactly how that works. So thank you, because that's the damage. It's not just an unfortunate event. Right. It's a damaging event. And every time it happens, you're repeating it and doubling down on that damage. And the other horrible thing about this is, because you create the double bind, there's no escape. There's no escape outlet. Therapy, consultation, work on, okay, what's this all about? Where is this coming from? What are you thinking? Let's talk about it. The exact opposite of how it's dealt with from what you've described, would be an outlet for that release. You could get out of those double binds, right, by figuring it out. But that's not how the Mormon bishops deal with it. And I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that's not how the Mormon approved therapists deal with it either.
Well, yeah. And so I want to make a couple of points. And that's, I think, where conversation is going, is that the therapy is really where we have a couple of points to make. But there have been a couple of individuals, like we talked about Spencer W. Kimball, his book, Miracle of Forgiveness, that equates homosexuality with the sin of murder, and masturbation as being next to it. And it's like really, really awful stuff. And what it's really doing, I mean, is co-opting people's human emotions, right? You have an attraction to somebody. That's something that you don't really fully understand. There's, like, we have songs about love, but it's something that's really hard to describe, because it's a huge boiling up of a whole bunch of different emotions all put together, and you don't know if they like you back. And it's, it's exciting, and it's invigorating, and it's terrifying, and it's all these things, right? So young, like, hormone washed brains are constantly feeling urges, feeling sexual desires, feeling the activation of their biology, their reproductive systems. And the church has done everything possible, and I think this is consistent with a lot of churches, of weaponizing those emotions, taking those emotions and flipping them against the person that is feeling those emotions. And Spencer W. Kimball did this so well in Miracle of Forgiveness. There's a really iconic talk by Boyd K. Packer. I know that name has come up a few times in our conversations, but he was just an absolute monster, a true monster of a human being. And he gave this talk. There's quite a few iconic talks, but this one is to the young men only. And it's known colloquially in the culture as the Little Factory speech, because he equated the male sexual, it was to a young men's general audience, or to a priesthood general audience. And he equated male sexual reproduction with a little factory, and that you don't want to start the factory before it's time to actually start manufacturing. And that the idea was that if you ever turn on the factory, then it's almost impossible to turn it off. So just never, ever, ever, ever touch yourself, and you won't ever start the factory, and then you'll be okay. And he also did even have a little tiny bit in that to carve out the exception for wet dreams. Occasionally your factory will need to clean itself out, and you'll wake up after a dream, and these things are fine. You don't need to talk to your bishop about these, but as long as you're not actually stimulating the factory into production, then it's okay.
Wow.
So
it's bizarre, isn't it, that you have a culture that is predicated on flourish and prosper, multiply, get it out there. But only when we say.
Yes.
Strict confines. They have to set the rules for everything that takes place in a person's life, especially their marriage, their love, their expressions, everything.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's so funny, because you'd think if they truly wanted to encourage, be fruitful and multiply, that, soon as we're ready, go. But instead, nope, not until we say it's okay, and that means marriage.
Yes. Yeah. Only marriage.
Right. Well,
one man, one woman, only. Yes.
Right.
And one man, one woman.
Which they're now emphasizing even more than they used to.
Is
Like,
this the 1995 proclamation?
that one
Yes.
has that in it, yes.
Okay.
And that's, yeah. But it's like the covenant in the temple, because it is one of the major covenants in the temple. It's the uh, first one of the Melchizedek priesthood, and it's the law of chastity, which it was that you will have sexual relations only with your husband or wife whom you are legally and lawfully wedded to. Very important on that wording because they did change it in the last year, and I'm trying to remember exactly how they changed it. But basically, what they changed it to was that that you were a man and a woman legally and lawfully married.
Right.
It was
right, making it crystal clear. We're not
Exactly.
talking about same-sex marriage.
Exactly. TBMs are
Yeah.
like, oh, it's just minor. It's not a big deal. But it's like, no, it is a massively big deal. And when we get to stuff about November 15, I'll explain why it's such a big deal. So
Cool. Well, we were talking about Kimball being the single biggest influence on the Mormon church in recent history in terms of really turning the engine or the boat or whatever you want to metaphor to use here, right? In terms of like, okay, we're really clamping down on this stuff now.
Chastity.
And this is 1970s. So rolling forward, what other events are moving this dial towards the intolerance we see now?
Which on that case, you need to also take into account how harshly they came down on the girls because of
Oh, tell me.
Because what the girls wore determined how the boys felt, which is common in the society as well. But you had
that whole thing,
things from the pulpit in general conference over and over and over telling girls, I mean, what I have on right now. Yes.
Well, you're showing shoulders, Shannon. It's so gross. I mean,
shoulders. Oh my God. Because this is when all of this came about is if you're just pornography. I think it was Dallin Oaks who first said that. I'm trying to remember.
Shoulders?
Porn shoulders. If you're showing off parts of your body, you are pornography to the boys. Nothing about, boys.
No, of course it's so.
To not
the women are the girls really are always convenient scapegoats for evangelical leaders, male evangelical leaders consistently, right?
Always are.
I mean, this is rife throughout the evangelical world, and we include Mormons in that, at least as far as that goes.
And it still goes on. I mean, granted, our society has it as well that's not Mormon. And, that's why the first question is always when a girl gets raped is what were you wearing? But this was just ingrained in girls all the time. And when you have this thing of you have to wear something, you could wear garments under, we talked about those last time, the Mormon underwear. You've got to have that, and so it's like I raised my daughter so that all of her shorts hit her knees and she always had sleeves, not tank tops and all of this shit, which was just ridiculous, really.
Right.
Because if somebody is looking at a little 5-year-old and thinking those kind of things, that person is the problem, not my daughter,
That's right.
So anyway, these are the way we were raised. And that the law of chastity was a huge, huge deal all the time. And so the Mormon church pushed to not teach sex education properly, to always teach abstinence. I mean, I think there's no way in hell they could ever get that changed here. When my daughter was a senior in high school and we changed schools, she was in a health class, and that when it reached that point, because the teacher could not teach about any kind of birth control, even if the kids asked the question, she could not teach it at all. She had to just not answer the question. That was the requirement in the school district. So the way she worked around this, she brought in a nurse. And the nurse could answer any question the kids asked. And so the kids actually got a proper education because she learned how to work around the laws, which is what the fucking Mormon church does for their side, And so anyway, that was one of the big things, because right here in Utah, the thing to know is the Mormon church is a massive influence on every law that passes here. They are to this day. They will have PPIs, as they're called, personal priesthood interviews. They send somebody in to talk to the state legislators to make sure they're going to vote the way they want them to vote. I mean, we saw this especially several years back when the people of Utah, conservative state of Utah, voted for medical marijuana. People went around, made sure that everyone understood the wording of the bill that was coming up and everything. And they voted for it for like 75% or something. I can't remember what it was. So then, the church kind of kept their nose out of it, we thought. But what happened is when the committee met together to decide how to enforce this or how to do it, who do you think was also represented there? The Mormon church was. What do you think happened? They made it impossible to really do it very well unless it was state controlled.
Right. Of course.
That meant all the way from farms through everything. So anyway, it's just,
and of
they
course
went against what the people wanted. Yeah.
The people who were awarded the contracts, of course, to create the distribution network in Utah were largely believing Mormons.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Wealthy, business owning, wealthy Mormons who said, oh, hey, we're seeing how successful this business model is in other states that legalize cannabis. So why don't we just skim our little piece of the pie off the top of that?
Mm-hmm.
So,
absolutely.
So
no, I don't think it's too hard to understand the Old Boys Network and that is alive and well all throughout Utah legislation and the business world and the merging of that with the church there.
Yeah. And that's what, I mean, we talked about this on a previous one when you brought up Romney and if he'd been president and stuff. And I mean, that's what these guys do to the state legislators here is there's the implied threat to their membership if they don't vote the way they're supposed to. And these guys that come will sit in the audience when the vote's happening and make sure everyone votes the way they're supposed to. So this is why we call Utah a theocracy, because that is absolutely what it is. Yeah. It's not as blatant to the rest of the world as it was when Brigham Young was in charge, but it's still just as bad as when Brigham Young was in charge. So when it comes to things like the law of chastity, that's one that I think that the church is never going to let go of their version of it, which is, man and a woman. That's what you were born as and all this kind of shit. That's all you get to have. They will never let go of that because it's their strongest method of control over the members. Because the threats they can make over this are the ones that are the strongest. And so, that's, like I said, it's the first token of the Melchizedek priesthood, which there's the two priesthood, the lower priesthood, which is Aaronic, and that's the Aaronic, Aaronic, not ironic. Sorry.
Okay.
The way I said it sounded like that. Named after Aaron.
It's ironic, all right. Yeah, it definitely is. I would just like to
the upper one, but
no, okay, cool. I just wanted to comment real fast that that it's shockingly similar in Scientology.
Yes.
In terms of how the next, Miscavige, like Brigham Young in so many ways, paranoid, absolutely. Like nobody can take over, and so I got to get rid of everybody who's got any power. Right? That's the second guy usually in line who's doing that drill, and Miscavige certainly has done that in the world of Scientology, but he has also amped up the sexual controls in Scientology, right? He's the one who where it came down, masturbation's not okay, and and these various we're going to really investigate your sexual activities and guilt you. It's really control via guilt. It's domination via guilt and shame and blame, and it's a very, very effective way of controlling a large group of people. It's a very unstable, I say effective in that it really does give you control over people.
It does.
But it's a unstable control because it destabilizes people because you're fighting their natural organic processes and urges. And so it's a constant fight. Once you take on that fight, you got to kind of take it all the way, or it's going to be a constant struggle. you know?
Right. Right.
Well,
And this law of chastity is an example of that, right? Just absolute rule, no question. This is how it is, you know?
Yeah.
and
Sorry, Bryce.
it's important to note like how much a faithful Mormon values their temple covenants. And Shannon, you said it earlier that like there's the 10 commandments of the Bible and Jesus commandments and everything, and Mormons do follow those, but
Yes.
when it comes to what Mormons actually think about, it is their temple covenants. When they go and take the sacrament every Sunday, they are supposed to be renewing their covenants with the Lord, right? You are supposed to be remembering every time that you've gone through the temple when you are sitting there taking sacrament. So this is a weekly reminder of covenants that you made in the temple that you pantomimed, cutting your throat open if you reveal the secrets of what takes place in the temple, right? It's that important, right? Like these things,
It's huge.
these covenants are life and death, eternal life and eternal death, right? There is nothing more important in the Mormon culture than the covenants that Mormons make with God, and chastity is one of those, right? So it's important to note how highly valued chastity is, valued in chastity, quote unquote, right? The very strict Mormon definitions of these things, right? And then let's also pick up another thread of what you were saying, Chris, is that once you start this fight, you can't back down from it. It has to be constant. It has to be consistent. It has to be community wide. And this is one thing that Mormonism does extremely well, is keeping communities together and cohesive and ratting on each other.
Yes.
Like the tattle network within Mormonism is unbelievably robust. And when somebody is being punished for sexual sins or for whatever, everybody who's sitting in their pew in sacrament meetings sees that they're not taking the sacrament. And immediately that starts the questions, that starts the gossip network, that activates the gossip network, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is the intentionality of like, oh, it's such a cohesive community. It's such a beautiful community. We all look out for each other, but it also polices itself extremely well. And that means that the top-down leadership can just issue these edicts like the 1995 Family Proclamation to the world, and the community itself will take that as instruction of this is how we're doing everything now. And I want to talk more about the Family Proclamation, but I want to pick up one more thread that you introduced there, Chris, and that is the therapy, the way that therapy is handled in Utah, because there's so many instances where a kid comes to their bishop, maybe their parents found them watching gay porn, or maybe they're just, they're not spending any time with the girls, but they're sure liking their friend Tyler, right? And the parents will bring that kid in front of the bishop. The kid will have to confess that they're having same-sex attraction. They're afflicted with same-sex attraction, right? Putting so many scare quotes into this sentence. And then the bishop can say, well, we're going to send you to a therapist to figure what's going on here. And the therapist, they can be a licensed therapist, mental health professional in Utah. But when they answer the phone from the bishop saying, hey, I have another potential client for you, they can choose what hat they're wearing when they answer that phone. Are they wearing, a spiritual advisor hat? Are they actually wearing their therapy hat? And there's a tremendous amount of variability within the culture of therapy in Utah, because the best therapists are ones that jettison the teachings of the church and actually provide mental health. But you don't know what you're getting. My first therapy experience nearly killed me. It was a terrible therapist, somebody who gave me a gospel-centered therapy session. And it was awful. I'm almost not here because of it, right? And then I found a therapist who involved absolutely nothing with the church and listened when I complained to her about the church, and was very kind and helped me understand my situation and gave me tools to deal with my world and culture around me. And I'm here because of her. She was an amazing therapist. But my first therapist was one of these gospel-centered therapists, right? And they can do a lot more damage than just the bishop, because suddenly they carry some level of authority, right? I'm here doing counseling sessions to get help, to get better, but here this therapist is telling me that my same-sex attraction is sinful. Like, what do you do if you're a gay kid locked into this situation? What the hell do? You have nowhere to turn. You have nowhere to go. So there's the entire culture of Utah and Mormonism is set up in this way to enforce compliance into its cis hetero norms and to completely weaponize people's sex and gender and their proclivities and their attractions against them. And especially with like it's very deep within the culture that you save yourself till marriage, right? Like that you shouldn't even have a longer than just a goodnight kiss, peck on the cheek before you're married, right? Like even that's stretching some boundaries.
Yeah.
So
No
with, like,
tongue. Yeah.
yeah. So like you have this entire culture of chastity, of their definition of chastity, and it is self-enforced. People self-enforce because it's so ingrained in the community. It's so part and parcel. And you have so many bishops interviews growing up where you're meeting with your bishop and look, like the people who got away from the cult least scathed, like me, just learned to lie to adults. That's not good. That's like the church didn't give me a useful skill. I mean, it gave me a useful skill, but not a good skill. I don't
Right.
want this skill. I don't want the ability to lie to a man who is staring at me saying, "Now, Bryce, have you masturbated this last week?"
Right.
I don't want to have the ability to confidently say, "No, I've been a good boy." But the church taught me that as a survival mechanism.
Right.
It's systematically practiced this way. It's not just individual isolated people who are having these experiences. It is almost everybody, with a few exceptions, who don't have this experience.
Right.
Right. Let me I'm sorry, but I just got to
Okay.
explore this a little bit more, Bryce, because you've offered me a window into something that I want to ask you more about, which was your first therapy with a Mormon approved therapist.
Yeah.
We don't need to do a whole transcription or anything, but I am curious. Did you understand this? Did you go into that situation understanding this to be a different thing, or expecting it would be a different thing from, say, a ward interview, or like those kind of interviews, the bishop interviews you'd have? The therapy was positioned as something different for you in your mind when you first showed up?
Yes. And specifically how I was able to compartmentalize that much more is I was not meeting with this mental health therapist at church. I was going to his office.
Yes.
Right? So it was in a professional setting. It was in his office, his license hanging on the wall, his name, in cheap vinyl stickers on the door, right? So that it has this professional veneer.
Right. So the context is different. Mm-hmm. And therefore the expectations are different. And yet you walk into this situation, and instead of getting therapy, what did happen? In brief, we don't need a blow by blow, but I'm just curious, what did the therapist do? Did they quote scripture to you?
So quoting scripture was that was only a couple of times that happened. And so I should have seen these. There were a number of things that took place at individual sessions that I remember vocalizing to my parents. When I get home, I would just kind of debrief with them what took place. And there were a few red flags along the way that I should have recognized that I didn't have the experience to recognize these were red flags, right?
Right.
But my very first session, he told me that his day job is actually providing therapy for inmates at the Supermax prison down in South Salt Lake, and that he's just moonlighting doing therapy for troubled teens. So that is a huge red flag, because the type of therapy that somebody is going to give to inmates should be very different than they're giving to teenagers.
Correct. Correct. I'm more than a little familiar with this, by the way. They are completely different schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that context, he had told me a number of times that I will often do this with my client, and then he would proceed to do those things with me. And so there was a few things along the way, a few other discrete events. But then I think the largest thing that should have tipped me off that this is not actually in my best interest is that it appears to me that he would have a a phone call or a debrief with my parents after numerous sessions, after every session, I'm not sure. And so I'm sharing these things, understanding that everything is confidential, because that is the nature of a counselor and patient dynamic, only to find out later that everything that I was saying was being parroted. And so I thought I had secrets. I thought I had an adult I could trust, and that trust was completely betrayed.
Right.
And
that is the exact opposite of a therapeutic environment.
Yeah, and it was when that took place that I went suicidal, and I survived. Right, I didn't make an attempt. I was just in a very low state for a very long period of time with a couple of close call scares. So I will say that my experience is far too common of people going through something like this, and also once I was able to go to this therapist and things continue to just get worse and worse and worse, that is when I struck out on my own and said, I need to find a better therapist. This one is not doing it for me. And that's when I made some cold calls and found an actual mental health therapist who I don't know how to say it, who fixed me.
Yeah, that's what it's for.
And it's important.
How do you fix yourself is what it is.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, and I went to an office that was psychiatry as well as psychology. So I was meeting with one of the doctors there who was working with the prescriptions and getting all of the drug cocktail finely tuned and perfect, while I was in the other room meeting with the actual counselor who was going through all of the other pieces of the therapy, and the two of them worked together on how to best create a therapeutic system that will work best for Bryce. And it fucking did, because when people use science to help people and to conduct medicine, it actually works. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And which is, one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate of therapy, right? Like when you get a good therapist, when you get someone who can help you through your problems and what you're struggling with, and you can get, whether it's temporary, whether it's permanent, the right drug cocktail, right? Like your entire life becomes so much better. I can't champion it enough. But all of this had to happen, right? I had to have that experience of this terrible therapist to find out that I need a good therapist, and to find out that the practice runs a wide spectrum, and that there are bad actors within this industry in Utah and in Mormon-centric areas who are there for the preservation of people's beliefs. They are not there for the preservation of those people.
Thank you for saying that, because that's exactly where I was going. That is the fundamental crime, if you will, of quote unquote therapy that is church approved in Utah or otherwise under the umbrella of the Mormon church, or whether this is occurring in evangelical communities otherwise, or anywhere really. I don't care if we have Islamic approved therapists. I don't want any of that in a therapeutic situation. It's not, these are two different topics. They are very, very different things, and they need to be kept separate. Religion and therapy. Obviously, therapy can deal with religion, but when therapy is religion, then it's no longer therapy. And this is I just can't emphasize boldface and italicize that enough. And there are a lot of people, let me just say this out loud for people who are listening, who are very, not maybe tracking with this or disagreeing with me, is let me just say, this is very, very, very fundamental to our ability to recover, or our ability to navigate life, is the separation of these things. And more than just the, because there's a lot of people who believe that this is the only way to do it. This is the best way to do it. This is how to do it. It's the best kind of therapy, is to have it overlaid with the religion. And I'm simply saying you're wrong. They need to be two different things. And worse, there's another little element I want to throw in on this, which is when the therapist is working for the church, they're not working for you.
Exactly.
And your therapist is your therapist, not your church's therapist. This is If they don't have, if there's another agenda, if it's agenda-driven therapy, and that agenda is driven by somebody other than you should not be in that room.
Yeah.
Right. The only exceptions I will say to that are involuntary commitment, where somebody is literally unsafe to themselves, a danger to themselves and others. Then that's a line that's not what we're talking about today. Right. We're not talking about youths who are a threat to themselves or others in that way. Right. And that's the only place where I'm going to say, let's have a little bit of an agenda that might not be on the part of the person. I'm still going to say, and keep religion the hell out of it.
Get it out. Yep.
Right. Just keep it out of there. That's the only thing I'm going to say about that. There's nuance in there if you look for it. I'm not trying to be absolute in my statements, but I just needed to say that.
You do, and it's even things like taking the religious aspect out of suicide. Because I grew up thinking, because this is the way I was taught, is that it's the most selfish act somebody could do and all that kind of garbage. And it wasn't until my spouse went on deployments and I started seeing things that happened with soldiers with PTSD, my spouse with PTSD, all sorts of things, and that my spouse has already, at this point in time, has come very close to committing suicide about 6 times during our marriage. And, these are all things and realizing what that actually is. And it had to change my whole perception because with Mormons over there and so much Christianity, it's just murder. That's all it is, whatever. And thinking nobody will miss you when you're gone. And I'm like, that's not what they are thinking. What they're thinking is, I'm in so much pain. This is the only way I can end the pain.
Thank you.
And changing that perception is what changed it. And so I think, it's similar to these things like I have all these thoughts about sex all the time and I'm evil because of it, blah, blah, blah. It's the same attitude, when you pull back of, oh, you're so evil because you have these thoughts,
That's right.
and it's just wrong. And taking religion out of it takes it into a normal, natural thing. And let me help you deal with it. Help me come to grips with it. And so, and these are, sex is a normal, natural thing. Yes. And then you bring in these religions like Mormonism, the same sex attraction or no sex attraction or whatever. And all of a sudden everything changes even more. And in the 80s, when I was a teenager, I just remember this was just hugely, it's wrong. It's not normal. God did not make you that way. Nobody was born that way, yada, yada, yada. And in fact, when I was on my mission, it was in 1988 is when I went. And there was one lady, we tracked it out. That's what it's called when you're out knocking on doors, is they call it tracting, even though you're not handing out tracts.
Okay. I never heard that before.
Mormon, but that's what they call it in Mormonism is tracting. Because, they've got to change words for everything. So, yeah. So, at any rate, there's one lady, she'd been waiting for Mormon missionaries to come to her door. She invited us in, was talking to us. And I can't remember what we were talking about this. She brought this up, but she said to us, why do you say homosexuality is wrong? They have proven it's in the animal kingdom. There are studies of squirrels, and she showed us the studies. Now, I know this wasn't as common, not common at all, actually, then, but I just happened to be raised being taught that the laws of science are the laws of God. And and that science would always prove Mormonism correct and prove all of these things correct.
That's interesting.
Yeah, which
way to envelope all of that into. Yeah. Okay.
So she's saying all that, and she's like, "So why does your church say it's wrong when this is normal?" And I had no answer, and I just was like, and I was the one, this was my door, and so I was the one doing most of the talking, and I just said, "I don't know." And my companion got all pithy into, oh, well, we just have to trust and have faith that the leadership is always correct and all this stuff. And so then, I was the end of it and she just didn't want to hear anything more. And I watched her face shut down because she was just hoping to have a real conversation with us. And it stuck with me for a really long time because this was an entirely new concept to me, that this was not a choice. This was normal.
That's it.
And it's like, if it's in the animal kingdom, it's going to be in the human kingdom.
That's right.
Humans are part of the animal kingdom. And so that made me start having to think about it. But yet, things like in 1995, when the Proclamation to the Family came out, I was still TBM then. Never occurred to me how damaging this document was. Never once at that time. And it happens, by the way, side note, I love saying this, it's the only women's conference I ever attended. And it happened to be the one where Gordon B. Hinckley read that thing. And it went overtime because he decided to read it there. But
lucky you.
Side note.
Well,
every Mormon listening to this or ex-Mormon knows why that's just such a funny thing to me.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Let's talk about the proclamation a little bit, right? So,
Yes.
I'm glad, Shannon, you're talking about your mission experience late 80s, right? Because we're still hot within the AIDS epidemic and with, the
That's right.
The presidency of Reagan and then HW, who followed, they were very hard on gays and very like, oh, it's all, it's all just sin. It's sinful behavior that's causing this. It's, people who are using party drugs that are getting HIV. And it's, it was the part of the culture, the conservative culture, was blaming the people who had AIDS for getting their AIDS, right? Instead of actually dealing with it and treating it like a health epidemic and having to handle the problems. It was all just put on the individual, right? So into this world is where the family proclamation to the world was created, right? We have Bill Clinton's presidency and his gigantic leap forward on gay issues with the Don't Ask, Don't Tell bill, right?
Yes.
That was seen by the conservatives, and it was like, oh, now they're letting gays into the military instead of just kicking them out. How dare they? This is going to feminize the entire military and whatever, right? So that was the hot button issue at the time, was Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and softening regulations on gay participation in federal agencies and whatnot. So the church comes along and proposes the family proclamation to the world, and it is when you view it as a outsider, not as a believing member who sees this as, oh well, this is a proclamation, right? So the hierarchy of revelations, right? We have the Book of Mormon, that is like the great revelation, another testament of Jesus Christ. That's the story of Lehi and his family coming to America, being Christian Hebrews, so on and so forth. That is like the scripture, right? But then there are the revelations after that. That's in the Doctrine and Covenants, and the revelations are spoken of by the prophets and written down, dictated, and then written down and canonized as part of the scriptures. Just underneath revelations are proclamations.
Okay.
Well, let me say, let me qualify that. Just underneath the revelations are declarations, and that's where we have the 1978 policy that opened up the priesthood to all men instead of discriminating on black skin. And then we had so there are declarations. The banning of the practice of polygamy is an official declaration. It's not a revelation, but an official declaration.
Okay. Thanks for differentiating this, because I wasn't clear on the fact that there were levels of this, I guess. So it's not revealed prophecy that black people can be in the priesthood. It's just it's a declaration that they can.
Yeah. And it is seen as revelatory, right? Because the gospel it's the church is run by God, right? But through his men, mouthpieces,
right?
So anything that happens in the church is revelatory, but something that rises to the level of revelation is something that has to be canonized. And so you can make an argument that the official declarations are canonized because they're printed in the Doctrine and Covenants, but they are not classified as revelation. They're proclamations. Sorry, they're declarations. Right? So underneath declarations, we have proclamations. And there have been various proclamations that have been promulgated. One of them, like the most iconic, my favorite to throw in people's faces, is the Negro, a proclamation to the world, where it was this 1949 statement by the first presidency that black men will never get the priesthood, and that they are subclass of humans, and that they sinned in the war in heaven, and they all these, and it's like the most bigoted stuff defending the church's racist policy or racist doctrine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just say real fast. I was not aware of that proclamation. I knew that attitude existed, and from our discussions, I imagined it had come out of shit rolling downhill from Brigham Young. I mean, being the racist that he was and prophet that he was, and them and prophets being of the nature that they are, they infuse the culture of their group with their personality. So I kind of imagined it was a bit more of a soft sort of dissemination of this idea through the culture, but it was literally put in writing and proclaimed that this is how it is.
Yeah. Church does.
My goodness.
They pretend like it didn't exist now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Who was it who issued it, Bryce? I was trying to remember.
Let me just look it up real quick.
Yeah.
Wow. So the racism that's in the church was as official as it can get.
Yes, absolutely.
It wasn't just a cultural point.
Yeah. I mean, look, Heber J. Grant, he was such an anti-Semite. He was one prophet during things like World War II, and just worked really hella hard not to help rescue any Jews. There was a German kid who's 16, a Mormon, who was like, this whole thing we're doing is wrong. And so he actually was putting out flyers and all this shit. Church excommunicated him for it.
Right.
And it's like, he was 16 years old and knew what was the right thing to do, dude. You know, when you look at that, history's not going to look very happily at you.
No, I was just thinking, talk about being on the wrong side of history. And and since I have it literally right in front of me, let me share this with the audience while Bryce is looking that up. The Proclamation of the World, 1995 is when this was issued. And I have the quote here. The first commandment that God gave to Adam and Eve pertained to their potential for parenthood as husband and wife. Yes. We declare that God's commandment for his children to multiply and replenish the earth remains in force. We further declare that God has commanded that the sacred powers of procreation are to be employed only between man and woman, lawfully wedded as husband and wife. And this was to reinforce and clarify the modern understanding of the law of chastity, all in 1995. But it's really interesting how you really do, you guys are showing me how you really have to be clear on what time period you're talking about as to what the values of this organization are, because they are mercurial.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and the Negro Proclamation to the World, that was by Heber J. Grant, who was the president at the time. It was published August of 1949. And I can read a couple excerpts here just so people understand what proclamations and how they're worded. Because I mean, we'll talk family here in just a moment here. But it starts, the attitude of the church with reference to Negroes remains as it has always stood. It is not a matter of the declaration of a policy, but of direct commandment from the Lord, on which is founded the doctrine of the church from the days of its organization, to the effect that Negroes may become members of the church, but that they are not entitled to priesthood at the present time. It's scripture, and then it says the position of the church regarding the Negro may be understood when another doctrine of the church is kept in mind, and namely that the conduct of spirits in the premortal existence has some determining effect upon the conditions and circumstances under which these spirits take on mortality, and that while the details of this principle have not been made known, the mortality is a privilege that is given to those who maintain their first estate. And that the worth of the privilege is so great that spirits are willing to come to earth and take on bodies no matter what the handicap may be as to the kinds of bodies they are to secure. That's essentially saying that black skin is a handicap. You are disabled by your blasphemy.
That's exactly what he's saying.
And finishing up, it says, and that among the handicaps, failure of a right to enjoy immortality, the blessings of the priesthood, is a handicap which spirits are willing to assume in order that they might come to earth. Under this principle, there is no injustice whatsoever involved in this deprivation as to the holding of the priesthood by the Negroes.
Wow.
So that's it's justifying it, and I mean, you bring it up that Brigham Young instated the priesthood ban, and he did, and that it would trickle down. But the thing is like when revelation is spoken of in this church, when a prophet says something, the people have to fall in line and defend it and defend it and defend it. And when it was in the late 1940s, we see that the church shifted away from this rhetoric about the doctrine of banning the priesthood for black men. And it was through the 50s and 60s that we see them softening and saying, well, we don't know why the Lord instated the ban, but it's just the will of the Lord, where they kind of walk back from making these harsh declarations as they made in 1949 with this proclamation. And then finally, that opens the door for Spencer Kimball to release the ban in 1978. It's like, for over 100 years, it was, this is the way we do things. This is the will of the Lord. You can't call us bigoted because then you're calling our God bigoted, and that's just not very nice of you to do. And we're defending it. We're digging our heels in. We're entrenching in this idea that black people are inferior to white people. And then it, moves away from being harsh, dictatorial, and dogmatic to being, well, we don't know why this is the way this is. It just is, which is exactly the same trajectory that we've seen with gay marriage in the church as well.
Right. Just
same-sex attraction.
There's probably a whole episode in this, and I'm just going to ask real fast, then we're going to get back on our main line. I'm sorry, folks, but I'm just curious. Yeah.
There's lots in this fucking church.
I mean, it just every single time, it's just like every one of these episodes is such a learning thing for me. So what about, dare I ask, okay, you have white people, you have black people. What about Filipinos? What about?
Oh, they're okay.
What
Native
about
Americans, Filipinos?
Native Americans?
Okay.
Yeah,
they're okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're brown. They're not black.
Yeah. It's African blood, specifically.
African blood. Okay.
African
Anybody
blood,
from the continent of Africa? Yeah. No.
Especially since, Joseph Smith put in the Book of Mormon, there was this one guy who built a boat and decided to go and take a bunch of people with him and travel somewhere. And according to Mormonism, that's what settled the Polynesian areas.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Islands.
So they're all part of Mormonism, Book of Mormon, Native American, all that kind of shit, even though there's nothing saying so genetically. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and their missionary efforts, that's been consistent through the entire history of the church. The missionary efforts to the Pacific Islands started in the early 1850s, right? Yeah. The Mormons got out to Utah, and it was almost immediately when they arrived there that Brigham was like, go to the Sandwich Islands, go to the Philippines, go out wherever you can and gather the lost tribes.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get back to the main line here. I want to connect a couple dots here, specifically with this policies. Now, we talked about the proclamation 1995. Let's get back on that track of what has been. Let's just go ahead and go all the way to present of official church stance.
Right.
Yeah. So the family proclamation was published 1995, right? And it's important to note that Utah was the first state to pass a Defense of Marriage Act in the same year. That's explicitly said because the question of gay marriage was becoming more and more in vogue, and what states would allow it, what states wouldn't allow it, it being a states' right issue versus having federal involvement within marriage. Like these are hot button topics. These were hot conversations all the way until the Obergefell decision, right? So this is going on. This is the cultural milieu of the time. So Utah is the first state to pass a Defense of Marriage Act saying marriage is only between one man and one woman, and that the church published the Family Proclamation in order to have a document that they could point to that they regard as the policy of the church, the doctrine of the church, or, it was the proclamation really was a statement piece about the church's gospel, about its theology, right?
That's the theocracy aspect of this. Exactly.
Correct, right? But it was, when you read the language of it, it's a legal document, and it is created in order to create a legal defense for defense of marriage acts and for anything similar that might threaten the church's position or allow gay marriage in Utah. So the church has, since the Family Proclamation, I mean, that was 1995, and then 1996 is when the Defense of Marriage Act passes in Utah. No, sorry, that was 1995 that happened. Then in 96, that's when the Federal Defense of Marriage Act was passed. And that's when it basically said the federal government will uphold states' rights to choose whether or not they allow gay marriage. So I found an interesting dialogue article from David Huston. It's titled "The Theological Trajectory of the Family Proclamation to the World," and he goes through just a very high level overview of kind of some significant events that took place throughout the Family Proclamation and these various bills being passed. And he says by 1998, the majority of states had either a constitutional amendment or statutory language banning same-sex marriage. So it's also important to note that the church was one of the primary opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment, because 80s church culture and prior to it was very like a nuclear family. And then and once again, this informs their opposition to gay marriage, right? Like the nuclear family that became so much of the American culture in the 1950s, 1960s. That's what the church's model of the family looks like, even to this day. They are much softer about the language that they use today, but it's still culturally taught that women should only get a degree as a fallback if their husband isn't enough of a provider for their family.
And to educate their children. Yeah.
And that as well, right?
Yeah.
So there are numerous statements from Boyd K. Packer and from various church leaders, the more bigoted shithead church leaders throughout the 80s and into the 90s, where they are on public speaking tours trying to get states to not ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And they were successful in doing so, right? Them and Phyllis Schlafly, Boyd K. Packer, these individuals were able to create enough of a fervor in these ultra-conservative communities and states, Utah being one of them, that the states would not ratify the Equal Rights Amendment because it was seen as an attack on the nuclear family. So that's all also part of this culture and context as well, that this is what is going on. These are the people who are leading the church. Then Gordon B. Hinckley comes along. Now, Gordon B. Hinckley is a progressive prophet by Mormon prophet standards, and he is a very outward-facing prophet. He does media interviews that no prophet ever has done before. He, ushers the church through the Winter Olympics in 2002. That was a huge spotlight on Utah. Mormons had to put their best face forward, and they did a fantastic job with it. So Gordon B. Hinckley was a globalist prophet in the sense that he was trying his damnedest to get the church seen and accepted in the large global religious movements, to be seen as a world religion, not just a kitschy little, those Utah Mormons, yeah, whatever, they just do their thing. He tried to make Mormonism much more global and succeeded in doing so. But of course, throughout all of this, he dies in 2008, I think it is, and Thomas S. Monson takes the helm. And Thomas S. Monson is just a straight company man. And during that time is when the gay rights aggressively expanded in American laws, and there were various states that were overturning their Defense of Marriage Acts or passing new laws that allow for same-sex marriage, and the church is very, very opposed to this. And under Thomas S. Monson's presidency in 2015, that is when the Obergefell decision actually comes down. And that's when it is federally legalized. All same-sex marriage is federally legalized. And more importantly, that states that have bans on same-sex marriage, if somebody gets married in another state, they have to recognize the validity of that marriage certificate, even if their state laws say that marriage is not a soluble marriage. So the church has a knee-jerk reaction to the Obergefell decision, like a lot of Christian bigots do. And that is when we get the most hateful policy that we've seen from the church in a very long time. And, once again, I'll pass the baton to Shannon because you were a member living in Utah when the November policy came down.
Right? That well, and at that point, I was more nuanced, leaning towards PMO, physically and mentally out, because the closet was really hard to keep closed. The closet of doubts at that point.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, I had a family member, a nephew who had come out of the closet, and my daughter, my reaction was the same, which was, oh, finally, because we suspected it for so long, and the reactions that he got from various members of the family were interesting and painful, but also nice in some respects. But I mean, my answer to him was, well, I know a little bit more about you now than I did yesterday. And that was it, because it was like, you're the same today as you were yesterday, but in others, it was different. But watching all of this reaction to him was a difficult thing because, people made out like all of a sudden he had changed. And I was like, he's always been this way, though. He's always been like this. And I've had many friends who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. And a friend of mine from high school, we are still friends to this day. She and her wife have been together since the same year that my spouse and I got together. So it's 31 years this year. And, those kind of things. And so, through all of this, I was watching her and her spouse going to the states that legalized marriage and getting married there. And they have 3 children together. And they wanted to make sure that if something happened to one of them, the other one had custody of the kids. Particularly my friend, if something happened to her, because she's the one who actually bore the children. And so I started learning so much more about that side of it from this friend, and this was going on for a few years. And so when Obergefell happened, the word around Utah was they're threatening our marriages. And my friend is like, how? We're not stopping you. We don't care about you. We just want to have the same thing you have. And Mormon's answers were, well, you don't have to marry this person. You can marry a man and then you can get to the celestial kingdom and exaltation and become a god and all that kind of shit. Well, they wouldn't say shit, all that kind of stuff. But this was going on all the time because it was threatening it, and you heard it from Mormon leadership and everything else and all this stuff. And then finally, November happened and this policy came out, and it was mostly aimed at the children of LGBTQ plus parents who were married.
That's right. I remember. That's right.
Yes.
How did this roll out?
And I need to look up the exact wording of it. But what they said is things like they couldn't join the church unless they disavowed their parents.
Right.
And were no longer living with their parents.
No longer living with them.
No longer
they
in
were
the home
particularly
of the
aimed at the
same-sex
ones that were married, which now when Obergefell
Where were they supposed to go?
I know, right?
Relatives?
Exactly.
Who are straight cis or something?
Exactly.
Like what are they supposed to? Oh my God.
It's stupid.
So the church's official doctrine was let's break up families.
These families
let's break them up because they're not real families anyway, the way we define them. So who cares, right?
Family is our definition, not this other one, this big one. It's only this little square one, not the triangle or the circles or the pentagons, And so one of the things I kept saying when Obergefell happened is I was like, wait a minute. This is a really good move because the temple covenant is you shall not have sexual intercourse with anyone except the husband or wife you are legally and lawfully wedded to. So, my friend and her wife are legally and lawfully wedded. This means they could go through the temple if they wanted to. She's still a member of the church. Her wife isn't, but I was like, then that fits within it. The church can be more accepting because the church is finally starting to make noises about accepting the fact that this is something you're born with, not something you choose.
Apparently, that's the
So
official church line now, is we
it is.
understand that we
The science
understand
is too
attraction's
strong.
not a choice, right?
Yeah. Now their line is, okay, all right. It's you're born with it. It's not your fault. You're not choosing, but you choose whether you act on it or not. So
That's
what
right.
we want you to do is just marry somebody of the opposite sex and do all the things we tell you to do and deny that part of yourself. And then you'll be blessed in the next life.
Yeah.
Yes, you'll be
It'll be
miserable now.
fixed.
It'll be hell for you now,
Yeah.
yada, yada, yada. But in the next life, God will fix all that.
Yeah.
It's having your cake and eating it too, right? It's notice this, we're the most tolerant, compassionate, wonderful group of people, but what we say goes, and this is how it is.
Yes.
And our compassion only extends so far, right?
As long as you fit within these parameters of what we say family is, then yes, family is forever.
Right.
But if you don't fit with our parameters, you don't get any of that. Yeah.
Right. So
real quick, the actual language of the November policy is it has 2 points. First point is the child accepts and is committed to live. So this is when a child of a gay couple can join the church. These are the criteria. The child accepts and is committed to live the teachings and doctrine of the church, and specifically disavows the practice of same-gender cohabitation and marriage. And bullet point 2, the child is of legal age, 18, and does not live with a parent who has lived or currently lives in a same-gender cohabitation relationship or marriage.
Right.
So even if you have, a gay dad who has, been repaired and is living in a heterosexual marriage, even if he used to be gay, you still have to disavow that and be somebody who is 18 or older and can disavow the practice of your parents.
It's just this weird, like it's some kind of plague or something, like don't touch me. You're going to pass your gay cooties to me or something. It's the gross, old school, like, you know where I go with this stuff, guys. I'm not going to repeat myself, but it's just Jesus, could we get out of the dark ages? I'd like to jump ahead or jump to another aspect of this, because I know our time is limited and we're going to have to wrap up soon. So, I want to talk about the conversion therapy aspect of this, because the Mormon Church has more than a little bit to do with this. Mainly, they will have lots of wiggle room and lots of deniability with, oh no, it's never been official. We've never officially, and yet, we find basically these troubled teen industry labor camps and these gay conversion camps run by Mormons, and a high concentration of this acknowledged within the troubled teen industry in Utah. And church-based conversion therapy is the most widespread form of that I can find all over the United States.
Yes.
And a point that I want to make right away, just to get it out there, is that the laws that you see, headlines you see out there, state by state, banning these things, only apply to licensed therapists. They do not apply. I have not found a state where they are applicable to unlicensed therapy, religious practice, or these kind of camps that are run by religious type oriented people, right? And they're going to pray the gay away. This whole classic trope. It is still alive and well, and none of these bans have shut any of that down. It is exposure that has shut those things down, of the abusive practices of what conversion therapy really is, that has raised enough of an outcry amongst professional circles that there's enough pushback on it that no, this is pseudo-therapeutic nonsense, and studies have been done proving that. This is not just my opinion. It doesn't work.
No.
If you're trying to get that product, that's not how to do it. But that doesn't change the minds of people who are absolutely convinced that you must beat and pound and discipline the gay away. Right. And so we have these things propagating. Do you all want to speak to this at all? Because I find it to be the most horrifying of this, of all the attitudes that we have discussed and all the rules we've discussed, all go to this.
Right.
The abuse of children who don't have a choice in the matter. The church literally officially acknowledges that and still unofficially sanctions because they've never forbidden any of these gay conversion therapy practices.
Yeah.
So where do you guys come in on this one?
Oh my God. I mean, really, you look at it, and that's a lot of what's going on in miracle forgiveness, even. Just that same kind of thing.
Yep.
He just spreads it to everything, anything sexual. Yeah. He was so afraid of the sexual thing. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, when I was at BYU, again, like early 90s, I had a very good friend who was pretty sure he was gay. And there was that secret homosexual community at BYU, but they also knew that BYU was watching them. And there was still versions of conversion therapy going on then, not the extreme electric shock and vomit inducing kinds, where they're forcing you to watch a gay porn and shocking you and everything, which did happen at BYU.
Yes.
Especially, it's happening under Dallin Oaks leadership, and it happened under previous ones. I've seen enough videos of victims of it. And so when Dallin Oaks gets up and says, that never happened when I was president there, it's like, yeah, shut your fucking mouth.
He's lying.
Because you are just outright lying right now. Anyway, but, this friend of mine, I mean, I dated him so that he would look hetero. And we did that on purpose because he couldn't bear the thought of them watching him. And so he would get warned, or, they would warn each other saying, so-and-so, they're watching you, do whatever you have to do. So this was going on. There was that fear in that community of what would happen if you were caught. And that's problematic because this is a normal part of yourself, of who you are inside of yourself.
Well, also consider that you're having to live in fear and even terror of electroshock or other, social and physical disciplines and punishments. And this is the organization that's supposed to be providing you with eternal salvation. I mean, again, double binds, man.
It's double binds. I mean, double binds have been around since Garden of Eden. I mean, first two commandments, that's what they were. Multiply and replenish the earth. Don't eat this fruit. Okay. Because this fruit will make you think and learn right from wrong. So don't do it. So, of course, all churches have it. Oh, my God. It's anyway. So, the AIDS epidemic was still frightening then. This was something we watched and everything, and watching actors who I always loved die of AIDS and not knowing all of that. Watching Princess Diana go in and hold an AIDS child, shake hands with them without wearing gloves, treat them like human beings, which no one else would do. These were all changes going on around that time for when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And so that was the atmosphere around here. And yes, in Mormonism, they didn't say it from the pulpit at General Conference, but it got said from the pulpit elsewhere that the AIDS epidemic was God's curse on the homosexuals. And so you were frightened of that. Yep. And you felt like it took threats and conversion therapy. It took this abuse, this torture to get the gay out of you, because it was already ingrained in you through everything else. And miracle forgiveness was there, and it was commonly recommended to be read.
That's right.
And so you felt like that was God's way of dealing with it, because trials are an evidence of the love of our Father in heaven. And so you're supposed to have trials in this life. And that just might be yours, is you were born with the same sex attraction. So your trial is to get rid of it.
Right.
All of those. This is all what's going on in the Mormon heads. And so it really wasn't until, I think, 2019 that the church finally admitted to the science of, yes, you're born with it, but you got to deny it. You just got to suppress it, because that's not in the next life. That's not what happens then.
That's right. This is radically similar to how Scientology deals with it, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know. Yeah.
And there are
Go ahead, Bryce.
Baptists and other sects that also will do it like this. Yeah.
Yeah. So it should be noted that Utah has, right, I mean, we've said it quite a few times, Utah's a theocracy, right? Nothing happens through Utah politics without the stamp of approval, or at least the church's eyes on it. And there was a bill that was passed in 2022 in Utah that banned conversion therapy. And this was lauded as, oh, the church supported this bill banning conversion therapy. Everybody is happy because it no longer is this damaging practice going to be taking place in Utah. It's fantastic. It's all awesome. But so many commentators and so many people who were talking about the bill missed this language in it. And I have the language right here. The clauses within the bill carves out an exception for quote unquote religious advisors. And religious advisors, it defines as an individual who is designated by a religious organization or association as clergy, minister, pastor, priest, rabbi, imam, bishop, stake president, or other spiritual advisor. So a very, very wide net that they're casting with the spirit or with religious advisor. And that the bill does not apply to those individuals. It says, quote, an individual who is both a healthcare professional and a religious advisor when the individual is acting substantially in the capacity of a religious advisor and not in the capacity of a healthcare professional. The law does not apply to them. So that is to say that right there, the law passed in Utah lauded as a conversion therapy ban with a religion-sized carve-out within it. That if you happen to, even if you are a licensed therapist, if you pick up the phone call from the bishop who says, hey, I have a kid here who thinks that they're transgender, would you take them into your program? If that person answers that phone with a religious advisor cap on instead of a healthcare professional cap on, suddenly none of the conversion practices that are being outlawed in lots of states are off the table. Suddenly all of them can be used. So, and similarly, right, when we talk about the November policy coming down, the church had lobbied and had given their stamp of approval to a housing and employment bill that incorporated gender identity and sexual expression into the language of Utah's non-discrimination laws, which meant that no longer, as of early 2015, no longer could someone, a tenant be evicted because they are gay. 2015, Utah finally crossed that threshold of not discriminating actively. Oh, unless it's religious.
Mm-hmm.
The religion has an entire carve out where it can continue to discriminate. So the church supports these bills. It gets a ton of good PR of, oh, the church is backing a bill that stops discrimination in Utah, but it's only backing it because it has lobbied so hard to get language into the bill that means the law doesn't fucking apply to them. Of course they're going to support a bill that doesn't apply to them if it's going to get them some good PR. They have their cake and they're eating it too.
Yep.
Bingo.
Cake eaters. Yep.
And this is no different in the other states where this is happening as well. So when you read about these bans, the fine print really matters because the fact of the matter is nothing's changed. Nothing has changed.
Exactly. It's just so happens. Yeah. And that Utah is just very unique in that it has such a dominant religious authority that it has such a massive influence on the state. Because like when we're talking about others, conservative religious states, by and large, they don't have a central governing authority aside from just Christianity, broadly speaking, right? Because you have your Lutherans, you have your Protestants, you have your evangelicals, you have all of these various groups and communities that are all disparate, that are all generally aligned in their bigotry and generally aligned in their ideas and their purposes and their political aims, but none of them are as unified and unitary as Mormonism.
Right.
Exactly.
The Mormon Church, it has a supreme leader who lives on the planet, and they are unbelievably powerful in politics.
Yes.
It's
way too much
It's
money.
just way too coordinated in Utah.
Right. Well, I had to get this last bit in because I know we have minutes now because we got to get Shannon out of here. So I'm going to go towards wrapping up, but I got to say this: come this fall, the Supreme Court of the United States has agreed to hear the case out of Colorado of a religious counselor who wants to use her religion as her primary means of therapy. Is a way of describing what she's saying, right? She's saying, look, I'm a religious counselor. I use my religion, and this conversion therapy ban that Colorado has enacted acted is a violation of my First Amendment rights as a therapist to practice my therapy with my religion. Right. This is now being taken up by SCOTUS this year. So this is a case to watch closely, because I've already made my position clear that that woman is out to lunch as a therapist. And I will never, ever change my mind on that, by the way. It's the blending of religion and therapy is a match made in hell. And does not, these two things do not belong in the same room. They're just different paradigms. Right. So that's happening right now. Right. So that could, if SCOTUS decides that she's right, and that she as a therapist has a First Amendment right to do whatever the hell she wants, no matter how many studies scientifically show that none of this works, then it's going to be, then all these quote unquote bans, they're already pretty useless, but they're going to become completely useless. There will be no bans, and
the bans
we will see.
Illegal.
And exactly, we will see a proliferation of this. And there's probably another episode to do where I trace back the origin story of this to Synanon. If anyone want to Google that, you'll find out what I'm talking about right away. There's a whole story narrative there to tell that all of this comes out of. None of it works.
No.
That's the bottom line. So the Mormon Church continues basically to propagate a belief system that is destructive to people psychologically and sexually, and then has its cake and eats it too, keeping up with the culture of, oh, we're the good guys. Mm-hmm. Not so much. But Shannon, so much. Please.
No, it's okay. I do want to bring up the point that just like everywhere else in the nation, Mormons, they're giving way on lesbians, homosexuals, bisexuals, but transgender, they're the ones they're the hardest on, because they firmly believe whatever you were born as is what God intended you to be, because that's what your spirit was before, as the spirit child of Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. So therefore, whatever you were born as, that's what you are. They're not saying anything about those who are born with actually both sexual organs. And
hermaphrodites.
Right. I was trying to remember the word. I forget names so much. Thank you. But this, transgender, they are harsh on now. They're as harsh as they were on all of them back in the 80s, So that's the thing to remember. They're just like everyone else that way. So they're afraid of it, apparently. I don't know what else to call it, but yeah.
No, it's fear because it's outside their control system.
Yes.
And if there's one thing that unites the common thread between all of our conversations, it is that the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if you will, is a totalitarian organization. It's totalist. It's a totalist system. It seeks to control every single aspect of your life. Yeah. There's no part of your life that is, in other words, free from the church's direct influence and orders. Scientology is that. The Mormon Church is that. The Hare Krishnas are that. I mean, this is what it is to be a cult. So, Bryce, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up today?
Yeah. Anytime that you see the Mormon Church is supporting legislation, get ready to have your heckles up, right? Like, always read the fine print. There's always a reason why. It's a slow moving, deliberate organization, and it is ultra conservative. And so anything that they are supporting, you would be quite in good form to just immediately knee-jerk oppose it, even if it does wear a label of, oh, non-discrimination bill, oh, gay conversion therapy bill, oh, the church is supporting it. There's some reason they're supporting it, and the devil is always in the details.
Exactly. All right, folks, a little bit more knowledge for you, a little bit more like, hey, wow, this was amazing. I hope you found this episode interesting, informative, and educational as always. And I hope you will check out the glass blocks. I always think glass door. I get to have that stuck in my brain.
It's better than glass ceiling.
Box podcast. Link
Yes.
below. Okay, check it out. That's Bryce and Shannon's show. Highly recommend. And we will be back for more. It feels like an endless well.
It'll take us 10 years.
There's so much. But the parallels with Scientology and with other cults and everything, it's undeniable. So let's just keep breaking it down. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.